Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new here. My name is Leila Diva and Merry Christmas! Today I'm going to be sharing with you guys my favorite books of 2020 and actually all the books that I've read in 2020 because they so happen to be my favorite. In the beginning of 2020, I made a list of resolutions for 2020 and one of them was reading one book per month. And maybe to some of you that's like bare minimum, but for me that was a lot because when I was studying journalism, all I was reading was just my material for my studies and I stopped reading just for myself at all. So it took some time for me to get back into it because I have always been a bookworm. Like I was that child that didn't have friends but had books with her always, and I loved literature always, and that is why I decided to study journalism. So to get back into my passion and to rediscover, rekindle my love for books and literature really meant a lot for me, and I'm proud to tell that this year I read 14 books. Well, one of them is very short, but I still consider it a book of its own, so we're gonna go with 14. And I'm gonna just share with you guys all the books I read from January to December chronologically, and I don't think I'm gonna be ranking them because I didn't think about that, and it's really hard for me to rank books. I either like them or I don't. So let's go ahead and let me share with you all the books I loved in 2020. So first book that I read in January 2020, I actually started reading it in December last year, but I finished it in January and I was actually taking it on the flight home with me. So I was trying to read it on the plane, and at first I really enjoyed reading this book. Oh, by the way, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Some people say Tolle, some people say Tolle, but I think it's Tolle, the correct pronunciation. And this is a very popular book, especially if you're into self-help. I'm pretty sure you read this book or you've heard about it. So I heard a lot about it and I decided to see what's up because especially at the time I was lost and I needed some guidance, and I was struggling with anxiety, and I still do. It's not like, oh, I was cured miraculously, but I bought this book specifically to help me deal with that. And I think when I was reading it, I had a lot of fun reading it, but then there were parts when I was not agreeing with the author, or I was just kind of questioning where does this knowledge come from. And he doesn't cite anything but, like, for example, Bible, and I'm not a religious person, so for me I need some other sources to prove your point. You know, maybe that is because I studied journalism, that's how we were taught to, you know, criticize whatever we're reading, but like maybe that's the thing with self-help books. It was my first attempt to dive into self-help books and I still don't know how I feel about them. So I did enjoy this book, but at the same time I was kind of like skeptical about a lot of parts of it. But what I could take from this book, and if you love this book, please don't take it close to heart, this is just my opinion. What I did enjoy about it is focusing on the moment, you know, because if you have anxiety, you do know that a lot of times you get anxiety, especially social anxiety, because you think of what might happen, what can go wrong. And it really reminded me or taught me to, in moments of panic attacks, to focus on what's happening right now and breathing. And that I find very helpful. And of course there are so many more helpful steps that you can take from this book in order to live a better and healthier life. Next book is Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and I read it in Russian because that is my first language, and this was actually part of my literature class in, I think, like 10th or 11th grade, so like high school, you know. And at the time I found this book very depressing because I was very depressed already, and I didn't really get into it, and I actually promised myself to get back into it at some point in my life. And when I was visiting my parents last winter, I actually saw this book and I was like, you know what, it's time for me to read it. And I was kind of scared to get back into it because I still remembered how depressed I was when I was reading it. So I didn't want to feel depressed again, but this time I think because I'm already much older than I was, I I grown into it. And now I understood this book and I'm absolutely in love with it. I can see why Dostoevsky is one of the most famous Russian and like world writers, you know, and I'm so happy that I'm able to read it in the original, and seeing how people who don't speak Russian read it like in their language makes me want to read more Dostoevsky, because like I have this ability to actually read it in the original and I'm not doing it, but then there are foreigners who are reading it in English or like whatever your language might be, because this is the standard of world classic literature, you know, or Russian literature. So basically, as you can tell from the title of this book, it's all gonna be about crime and punishment. So the guy that commits the crime, his name is Raskolnikov. He kills an old lady and her sister. I think everyone knows that. That's no spoiler. And the most interesting part starts after that. So that is how it all begins. But then the book gets kind of darker, but at the same time, you can learn a lot from books like this one. You know, that no matter what crime you commit, the punishment is gonna go with you, even if you'll be able to hide the truth from everyone else. You will know what you did, and that in itself is the punishment. So that's what Dostoevsky is trying to tell us, but you just need to read this book, because me just explaining it in 5 minutes will do it no justice. Next is Hermann Hesse and his work Steppenwolf. I absolutely loved this book. It tells you the story of Harry Holler, who is this respectable older man who is going through, like, I don't know, depression, I guess, existential crisis. He thinks a lot about committing suicide, but then story gets more interesting and he meets a woman, and you know, it's kind of like, it's not a love story, but he is trying to find other ways to cope with reality. An old intellectual who finally discovers the world of passion, and he meets all these people he usually wouldn't hang out with, and he finds some meaning in it, and he starts seeing that life is not just books and wine and depression, but it's more than that, and at the same time it's less than that, and that is the fun of it. And I definitely recommend this book to everyone who has ever felt like a lonely wolf and not able to fit into the society that you're surrounded with. This is what I've been struggling with as a teenager, so I do wish I read this book earlier, but still as an adult now, I sometimes do have those episodes when I do feel very alienated, and I definitely relate to the main character in this book. So for me, reading this book was in a way eye-opening to how I could be able to deal with life in the future, you know? So I definitely love this book. It's gonna be one of my favorites for sure, and I recommend you to read it. Next book that I read is Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, and it's a very famous book, and actually Oscar Wilde did not write a lot of books. He produced a lot of plays, but this is his most famous book. I might be wrong, probably he had one other book or a few more, but I think this one is, or maybe this is the only one. I probably should have done research. I did do my research when I was reading it, but now I kind of forgot, and now I'm confused if I remember it correctly. Either way, this book is usually associated with the dark academia aesthetic that is very popular right now, so you probably already know about this book, or you just read it even if you're not into dark academia. I absolutely love the story. So Dorian Gray is this young, good-looking man who doesn't know how handsome he is until someone else tells him, and then that someone else, his future friend, tells him, oh, you don't know, like, it all passes so quickly, you're gonna lose your basically beauty, and then you're gonna be old and ugly, something along those lines. And after that, the guy freaks out and he basically sells his soul to the devil. He kind of says words that kind of like, oh, I wish I was as young as, you know, as I am forever. So he actually never ages. And there's this portrait that does age, but Dorian doesn't. And the more bad stuff Dorian does, the uglier his painting becomes. So he hides it away from people. and that's his a little dirty secret. And you would be like, well, now I know everything, why would I read it? But there is so much more to it. This is just basically to let you guys know what's going on inside the book, but there is so much more to it. So please read it if you haven't yet, and if you are trying to get into classics, I think this is the perfect way to get into it, because it was super easy to read and very beautifully written and still so related to our reality today. Next book that I read is Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice. I was younger, like I think I was about 15 years old. I read Jane Eyre, and I remember that I wasn't a fan of it, so I was like later on thinking about it and trying to figure out why I didn't like that book, and I thought that it's just because I was young and I didn't understand a thing, you know. So I was like, well, now I'm gonna read, like, you know, something from that era, something that is usually like goes hand in hand with Jane Eyre, and that is Pride and Prejudice. And I was like, this time I'm gonna be into it. And you know what, it was interesting, but I wouldn't say this is my most favorite book. Like, I was kind of bored reading it, because you know, the times when this was written and the times that are being described in this book, it's not really my perfect time I would be living in, you know. It was those times when women were not allowed to inherit the property, even if they were the only kids in the family, you know what I mean? So this is what happened in this family. They had about, like, I think 5 daughters, no sons, so they would pretty much, after their father's death, have no place to go. So their mom is like super crazy about making all her daughters marry rich men and successful, which I understand at the time that was like the only way to make it happen, like for your daughters to survive in this cruel world. But like, just the fact that that was the reality, like, I don't know, I was just so unhappy with it. So reading it and just being like, oh yeah, the only way to make it in life is just to get married, and that's like, I don't know, I wasn't happy with that, and I didn't like their mother. But I understand that this is like, just, this is how it was, and I shouldn't be mad about it, but I was. So I kind of didn't really enjoy reading this book. So I don't know if I'll be reading any more books by Jane Austen. However, I did read her biography, and I think her life story is so interesting, and she actually never married, which is crazy, because like her books are focusing on love stories so much. So I do love Jane Austen, but Pride and Prejudice, I didn't really like it, no. Okay, we have a visitor. This is Luna. She's gonna be here. I hope you guys don't mind. Luna! Okay, so next book, I'm sorry guys, I'm closing my dog, but she's right behind me. So next book that I read is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. This is American classic, and I always wanted to read it. I heard a lot about it, and I heard a lot from other people saying, well, this did not age well, and like, why is this still like, you know, the most like favorite or the most well-known kind of book about, like, you know, anti-racism basically, because we can do better than that. I still enjoyed it, and I think, you know, it all starts somewhere. Yes, of course, today there are more and better books talking about racism and fighting it, and just the whole system that America has, and other countries as well. But this one specifically shows us working class in the deep south of the 1930s. So that was very interesting to read for me, someone who like doesn't know a lot about like 1930s in the deep south. I do kind of have some sort of understanding, but still this book really was eye-opening for me, and it is really crazy how racism is still something that is part of our society. And you read this book and it like describes something that happened in the 1930s, but it is still possible to happen these days, and we all know examples that are even worse or as bad as the one described in this book. So I did enjoy reading this, and I'm happy that now I can say I read this book and I know what it's all about. So next book I actually loved so much. It's definitely one of my most favorite, and I'm so happy to share it with you guys. You just have to read it, and that is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And this book is kind of considered self-help, but I don't think so. Like, it's like self-help for your creativity, you know? So that's like different kind of self-help. I don't know, I always care who the advice is coming from. So if I'm taking advice from you about like marriage, I want to make sure that you yourself have built successful marriage, you know? So if you're a writer and I'm getting advice on writing, I do want to make sure that I like the way you're writing, or like you are a well-established writer. And when it comes to Elizabeth Gilbert, you know, she's the author of Eat, Pray, Love. I didn't read actually her other books. This is my very first one, and I've heard that there are so many other good books that she wrote. I definitely want to read more from her, but I just wanted to try Big Magic because especially at the time when I was reading it, I was kind of going through some sort of like creative blog. So at the time it was exactly what I needed, and just reading her book and guiding me to just find my voice and just to go and create, you know, because I feel like creative people always are like waiting for the perfect moment, or just anybody, like whatever you're doing. Actually, her book is not just for creative people. She is actually writing that you don't need to be a creative person to have creative life, you know, you just need to choose to live your life creatively. And basically what I love the most about this book, like what it gave me, is that you don't need to sit and wait for the muse to come. No matter what you're doing, writing, making videos, singing, you know, whatever you're doing in life, like creatively, you just need to start your day and go and sit down and do the thing, you know, and the muse is gonna just come. It never comes just when you're doing nothing. It always comes when you're already working on something. And also not to try and protect your work, you know, no matter how much you feel like this is your child, you know, you invested so much into this. You just need to let it go and let it be free. Once you created it, you just need to let it go, and if people will like it, they will like it. If not, whatever, you'll create more. It's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to sit down and make it happen, and the outcome cannot be controlled by you. So there is so much more that this book has taught me, and I definitely recommend to every single person to read this book because it is life-changing. There's also TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert that actually I think inspired writing this book, and I actually watched that TED Talk, and that TED Talk inspired me to get this book. So it's actually all correlated. So if you want to read this book, maybe first watch TED Talk and you will see why this book is so important to read. Next book is by Nietzsche, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and I read it in Russian, so there's that. Actually, the story of me getting this book, I bought it like ages ago, and I was about like 18 or 17 at the time, and I really was ambitious enough to read Nietzsche, and I thought I have enough knowledge to get it. And then once I started, I was like, okay, I'm not into it, so I left it for more years to come. Basically this summer I was like, yeah, it's time to read it, because it's been about 7 years, I think. So I read it. I was on and off with it because it was so boring, but like I liked it. It's a very deep book, and I do think that it's not for everyone. And he actually, like, there's second name for this book. It's like book for everyone and no one, something like that. And I actually think it's for nobody. Like, I don't know, like it's for everyone but then for no one, you know what I mean? Like, you need to be into philosophy to get this book. And I'm not saying like I'm so smart, I got everything, but I do like the whole spirituality thing, and he does kind of talk about religion. You guys know the phrase God is dead, you know, everyone knows that that's what Nietzsche wrote, and a lot of people think that's like because he didn't believe in God, but actually it's because he believed in God. He just was kind of making fun of his society. So it's a very deep book, and it is definitely not for everyone. And if you're not into philosophy, spirituality, trying to understand religion maybe in a way, or like society, maybe you won't enjoy this book, but if you're into one of those things and you do want to have some knowledge about Nietzsche, because you hear about Nietzsche all the time, right? So I kind of wanted just to know what the whole deal is about. So I liked this book, but at the same time it was hard for me to read, so I was starting new books, then getting back into it, but eventually I did finish it and I'm very proud of myself. Next book is the one that I was talking about. It's super slim. It's because it's only 52 pages, and that is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, We Should All Be Feminists. I wanted to read this book ever since I watched her TED Talk, and it was basically, I think this book was inspired by that TED Talk. So just like Big Magic, or is Big Magic like vice versa? I don't know, but basically like they're correlated, right? So I watched that TED Talk like ages ago, and that TED Talk inspired me for so many years. Like I found so much power in just listening to her saying what she was saying there. And this book is just basically that speech, but summarized and just with some additions, but I thought it's gonna be more than 50 pages, you know, so I thought it's gonna be like at least 100 pages. So I didn't know that, but nevertheless the book was amazing. One evening, like I started it and I finished it the same evening, so it just took me like an hour, I think, because I was so into it, and it's such a great book. And I do recommend it to everyone who is into feminism, who considers themselves feminists. I think the more we read about feminism, the better, and I definitely want to make commitment for 2021 to read more feminists and more books related to women's rights, empowerment, and just, you know, women. I love them, and especially I want to support people of color and women of color. So I started in 2020, but I do hope to do more in 2021. Next book is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Rani Lodge, and this book was on my list for like I think a year or two, because like I do remember like people talking about it and I wanted to read it because, you know, the title is so bold, and I always wanted to start doing more research on, you know, racism and like race studies. I don't know. What we saw this summer, the death of George Floyd, that was terrible, and that's not the only, you know, injustice and suffering of people of color, and especially Black community. Like when that happened, I, like so many other people, really wanted to start reading more books on, you know, racism. And this book was one of them, and it was actually very hard to get any books on, you know, racism or Black Lives Matter movement. So eventually I was able to get this one, and I was so happy because I was like ready to learn more, because especially during Black Lives Matter movement period, you know, I had uncomfortable conversations with people who were oblivious to the reality, you know. And I think that we might be told that there is no racism in America today as people who don't live there, but if you do more research, if you do read more books or watch more documentaries and just listen to people of color sharing their experiences, you'll be able to hear that there are so many issues that are still related to the struggle of people of color, and especially Black people. And this author is actually British, so it was very interesting to know more about struggles of being Black in the United Kingdom, because that's something that nobody talks about. So this book was so eye-opening. I actually recommend it to everyone, and it's written by a journalist, so this is a very more like scientific kind of book, you know. It's like it's based on fact. She doesn't just like write whatever she thinks or like her experiences. This is like just straightforward facts and data, and she brings so many things to your attention that you didn't know happened. I learned a lot about, you know, riots that happened in the United Kingdom and today's struggles of Black women, especially. She has the whole chapter talking about feminism and Black women, that white feminists a lot of times don't want to even focus on, you know, racism, and they don't think this is their fight to fight. But basically, if you don't fight for people of color and minorities, then fuck your feminism, because feminism is not just about females' rights, it's also and most importantly about minorities' rights, and especially black women. They suffer so much more from the injustice that this patriarchic system has inflicted on us as women. And this is something that is yet again based on facts. It's not just, you know, oh, the writer just decided to complain about life. She gives so many great examples that I never even thought about. So this book is like a life changer. I definitely want to reread it. I definitely want to read more. And I just recommend it to everyone. And if anyone tells you racism doesn't exist, just give them this book and say goodbye after that. Next book is also by a British author, and this is Bernardine Evaristo, Girl, Woman, Other. And I heard a lot about this book because this is actually, it was written in 2019, I think, or 2018. Yeah, 2019 it was published, and so it's so fresh. And I usually never read contemporary writers, but after this book I actually started rethinking my reading choices. Usually I just read books by male authors that already died, you know, and I'm like, I need to read more women from my times that go through the same kind of experiences that I go through. And especially, as I said, women of color. Like, I really want to commit to supporting women of color, because it's so much harder to make it in the publishing industry if you come from, you know, different background. And this book was so interesting because it focuses on different stories of how many women? Wait, it tells you the story of 12 women. So each chapter has 3 stories of 3 different women. The author is African British, and all the heroines in her book are also African British. So it was very interesting to, you know, dive deeper into the whole race issue in the United Kingdom. And so interesting because there were so many different stories. Some of them I related to more, or like, you know, related as much as I could. In some of them, you know, I saw my friends and people I know. Some of them were just crazy. Some of them were like I couldn't relate to it because, you know, it was different times, but all of them were super interesting. So I definitely recommend you to read this book. So next book is Eric Fromm, The Art of Loving. This book I read ages ago, and yet again I was about like 17-18, and I read this book at first in Russian, but then I decided to gift it for our anniversary to my husband. And the reason why I did that is because this book taught me so much about the art of loving, and I think the person that I am today, especially in my relationship, is because of this book. Because I was so young when I read it, I kind of got to know better what I want in the future. And as I gifted it to my husband, I actually wanted to reread it myself, and I finally had time this year. While I was waiting for my other books to arrive, I reread this book, and you know, second time was not as charming as the first time, because first time, you know, that was so eye-opening. I was so young and like I didn't know a lot about relationships, you know. And not to say that now I know it all, but you know, now I'm married, so like I'm not 18 anymore. Maybe because subconsciously I remember a lot from it, so that's why it wasn't as life-changing as it was the first time. But I do think that every young girl, and maybe not just young girl, but like I think especially if you're young and you're trying to make your relationships work, or you're wondering why it hasn't worked, you know, whatever your reasons might be, I do recommend you to read this book. As you guys know, Eric Fromm was a well-known psychoanalyst, and his works are still widely popular. I do want to read To Be or To Have, I think it's called, a book by him. It's also on my list, so if you read it, let me know. But if you want to get introduced to this amazing author. I do recommend you to start with The Art of Loving. Luna is having fun, you guys. Okay, so next book is More Than Enough by Elaine Welteruth. For those of you who don't know, first of all, this cover, like, I love this cover. There are two and I really wanted this one. Okay, so who she is. Elaine is a former editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue, and she is a fashion journalist and just a cool lady who inspired me. I was very interested in reading her autobiography, and I really wanted to get that inspiration for, you know, building your career, trying to find yourself. And the title itself says more than enough, and that's all I needed to hear, you know. So reading this book really felt very personal. It felt like, you know, getting like life advice from your older sister or your mentor that I never had, you know. So if you also want to get some inspiration and to know how to make it in especially fashion industry or like any other industry, I don't think you need to be necessarily into fashion journalism to be interested in this book. If you're just trying to make it in your 20s, I think this book will help you deal with it, you know. In a lot of ways it did inspire me, and it did give me that motivation to go out there and do what I was scared to do. And I hope I'm not gonna lose that feeling even like years and months after, you know. But it was definitely something I needed to read right now in my life. Reading her story, reading her struggles, and how she became editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue. That's so inspiring because she does not come from money or connections. So, you know, as someone who can relate to that, I wanted to know how she made it happen. So that was very inspiring. I do recommend it to you. And the last book of 2020 is the one that I am about to finish. I was supposed to finish it before I was gonna film this video, but you know, December is so crazy. I barely have time for anything. So I have about like 20 pages left, and it's not a lot, so it will take me literally one night before going to sleep to read the rest of this book. But I haven't done that, and I am sorry about that. But nevertheless, I decided to include this book because I am finishing my year with it, and I really got to the point where I can say this is definitely an amazing book, and I do recommend it to everyone. And I need to say what the book is. So this is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor who is also a psychoanalyst, who is also the founder of logotherapy. In the first part, this book tells you about his life during the concentration camps and how he went through it and how hard it was. And you know, reading that part, like no matter what you're going through in your life, it just like reminds you to be grateful for what you have, because reading what he was going through and how he was able to survive that, it really is humbling and motivating, you know, to never give up on your life, no matter how tough it gets, no matter how hard it gets. You just need to keep on believing in something and to believe in the meaning of life. And in the second part, he focuses more on the whole trying to find meaning of life process and talks more about logotherapy. And honestly, if you're going through tough times, I think this book is going to be such a great one to start your healing with, because it definitely shows you that yes, life can be cruel, and sometimes you may not be able to find any reason for why it had to go this way, but it's not for you to just give up on your life just because it's hard. You need to always be able to find strength to go through whatever life throws at you. And sometimes the meaning of your life can lay simply in trying to survive the struggle that you have to go through, and that in itself should give you the meaning to live. And he tells how he personally was thinking about his wife when he was in the concentration camp. He would imagine talking to her, and that was his biggest motivation. And another thing that was helping him to go through those hard times is thinking about the book that he had to give away, because basically when he arrived to Auschwitz, he had his book with him that he was supposed to publish. It was, I think, either almost done or just done, and they of course didn't let him keep it, so he lost it all. And for all those years that he was in different concentration camps, he was always thinking that if he will be so lucky to survive this, he will be able again to rewrite that book. And that gave him also another meaning to live. And just surviving that and believing that there's, you know, God's plan is behind that was something that helped him personally to survive that. So I can talk a lot about this book, but I definitely recommend everyone to read it, especially because Holocaust is such a huge part of the history, and I think remembering that and acknowledging that part of the world history is just the way for us to not let the history repeat itself, especially with so many conservative and right-wing politicians now coming to power, saying awful things about minorities, whether it's like religious minority or ethnic minority. And it's very hurtful to see those people come back to power, especially in Europe. You would think that after what Hitler did to Europe, they would be able to learn from their mistakes. But no, but I think it's up to us, the new generation, to do our best, educate ourselves, and to fight the fight for justice and equality, and to never let what happened to Jewish people in the 30s and 40s to happen to any other ethnic or religious group. So that was a lot to talk about. I was really trying to do it as fast as possible, but at the same time to, you know, have some time to tell you guys why each and every single book is important and I recommend it to you. Some of them, of course, were more interesting for me to read. Some of them are more favorite than others now, but all of them I honestly had such a great time reading, and I'm so happy that I got back into reading. And you know, if you are trying to get back into reading, you know, sometimes it takes time to get back into it, but once you do, you cannot stop. You always need to read something. And like, I am personally now waiting for my new book to arrive finally, so I can start 2021 strong. And the book that I'm waiting for right now is actually about female empowerment. I'm not gonna share yet what the book is, you know, being, you know, whatever I am being trying to be intriguing over here, but I'm very excited to start 2021 by reading more about female empowerment, you know. So in 2021 I really want to become stronger, better, and, you know, just more educated on things that I actually care about, and that is feminism, and that is racial equality, gender equality. When I say feminism, I don't just necessarily mean like women above man, I just mean like equality. But I do actually love women more than men, you know, because I am a woman, so I do stand for my girls out there. So I do want to learn more about the ways how I can improve my life and the life of other people, you know, and be the change that I want to see in the world, because I'm honestly tired of seeing all the bad news and all the bad stuff happening. Like, you need to be that change, you know, because if not you, then who, honey? And if I inspired you guys to read any of the books that I recommended and I read in 2020, please let me know in the comments section. If you have any book recommendations, also make sure to share that, share what you read in 2020. I had so much fun reading these books and sharing all this with you. I do think that in 2021 I'm gonna be sharing more book videos, because it was a lot to talk about in just one video. So I wish I was like kind of sharing, you know, 5 books per, I don't know, every 3 months or whatever. No, not every 3 months, that would be like not enough. Anyways, my dog got tired and like sleepy from all the book talk. I hope you guys didn't and you watched this video till the end. If you did enjoy it, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, click that bell to get notified about my new videos. And with that being said, Merry Christmas you guys, and I'll see you in my next video. I love you, bye.